We measure well-being at Grosvenor. We draw on ONS Wellbeing Dashboard, which means that we can use data that's comparable, consistent, and robust. It isn't woolly. Now, companies like Grosvenor can invest in bespoke, granular data gathering and analysis. But that's not to say that there isn't lots of free data out there for various organisations and businesses to lean on, as long as you recognise that data-led decision-making is really important. Now, our approach to social impact and well-being is not about making rich people's lives better. It's about responding to and addressing issues that impact everyone and making a concerted effort to make sure that we're benefiting those most in need. Now, we haven't solved the problem, we've still got a long way to go, but over the last 18 months, we've been investing a lot of time and resource on a number of different interventions to respond to local need and improve well-being in areas that we know is most important. We've also spent a lot of time trialling and applying new engagement methods to make sure that we're giving everyone a say in the process.
30 seconds to go.
Thank you. And that's included a youth forum, which Nida's been part of and which she's going to talk a bit more about today, as well as new digital tools, participatory methods, and immersive exhibitions, just to name a few. Now, data gives us some guardrails to work within, and it helps enable us to make better informed decisions. But it must be coupled with meaningful engagement in order to make sure that we're delivering sustainable social places that will work in the long term. And I look forward to reflecting on what this looks like in practice with speakers today. Thank you.
Brilliant. We're going to clap all our speakers. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you. Nida.
So, as Nicola mentioned, my name is Nida. I was part of Mayfair Youth Forum, currently studying real estate at Reading University. So in the brief time we have together, I just want to share my perspective on how we can engage wide and deep with data to create happy places. I think to start with, while we dwell on quantitative facts and figures to help us establish what happy means for different regions in the UK, we also have to look at how we can engage with communities to really get their stories and narratives to help us shape our places. And the way we can do that is, one, by engaging with demographic trends. I think there has been a surge of youth population, as Nicola mentioned, and catering to their needs is pivotal, because essentially the places that are shaped today are going to be lived in by the young, by the youth of today. So it's ever important to take into these opinions and ensure that we are using publicly available data, as Nicola mentioned, to create happy places. To truly create happy places, we have to engage deep with words. We have to listen to people's stories. We have to listen to concerns and aspirations of young people. And while I was on Mayfair Youth Forum, that's exactly what Grosvenor did. We created a manifesto in which we wanted the redevelopment of Grosvenor Square to be upheld against. The young people on our panel worked out a few things that we found non-negotiables that we wanted Grosvenor Square to include. And at the end of our consultation progress, we realized that we could quite honestly tick them off. We realized that Grosvenor had listened to our feedback and taken that into account while drafting planning permissions and other plans for Grosvenor Square. What's also quite important to take into account is the economic disparities that certain areas grapple with. While I went to school in Westminster, I'm originally from Luton, it doesn't have the best reputation in the country, and part of the reason of that is that our council is not as funded as Westminster City Council, which often means that young people are more inclined to try and leave the town rather than stay in it, because there's simply not enough economic growth or employment opportunities for us to want to stay in the town. So, while infrastructure is quite important, as mentioned in one of the previous panels, you also need to create more opportunities and create a happy place. And one of the key important parts of that councils often miss is youth consultation, because you can cater to the old or those who have lived there for quite a long time, because they're more inclined to just continue living there. But for those young people who are wanting to stay there after education, you have to create something that's quite inviting and attractive for them, and that's quite difficult to do. Another thing that's quite important to tackle is youth unemployment. Our local council did something called the 16 by 16 programme, where they fed back from local employers and asked them what are key skills that they look for in young people looking to hire in the area. And essentially, throughout our high school career, we sort of fed into those skills and we ensured that we gained enough of them so that we were good candidates for local employment. And that can be done on a much larger scale and not necessarily involving vocational employment. That can be done with non-vocational employment. I think it's also quite important to allow young people to be active agents of change. We have to hand young people the power to help shape their communities and the industry that they want to go into. And some of the facts that I just want to point out there is that A survey published by Grosvenor took the feedback of 500 young people aged 16 to 18, and only 11 of them had been asked about their opinion, this is across the UK, about the future of their neighbourhoods, and 8% had taken a part in public consultation. That is a staggering figure when you look at the overall demographic makeup of the UK. While data is quite key to engage with, I think it's also quite important to consider a holistic approach to urban engagement. Engaging young people is not just a facet of policy, it's an acknowledgement of everyone's role in the broader political and societal fabric that shapes our shapes our spaces. And I think a key part of that, or a key tool that can be utilised, is co-design. I think we work best when we take into account multiple opinions, but we also feed that back. It can be a two-way street. It doesn't just have to be property developers reaching out to young people being like, what do you want? But rather where we walk hand in hand with young people and members of our community to ensure we create spaces that are efficient, that are utilised, and that continue to be sustainable for the future. It's also quite important to take into account youth aspirations. How can property companies and local councils work hand in hand with young people to take into account their aspirations and essentially create places that feed off of those? It doesn't just have to be you going to young people with a plan, with a certain idea in mind, and you want young people to help you consult on these things. It can also be the other way around. You look at what young people in your community want to do and then create spaces based off of that. And that ensures that cultural perspectives, dreams and concerns are playing a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of our neighbourhoods. It's also quite important to consider cultural diversity. I think that the property industry sort of falls short when it comes to token inclusivity, accessibility, ineffective communication and transparency. I think that the methods of communication currently utilised by property industry as a whole is quite ineffective, because when we talk about engaging and having youth consultations, it's a matter of how are you actually doing that? How are you trying to reach young people instead of hoping that they will come to you? So are you going to youth forum events? Are you going to youth councils? Are you engaging in youth groups? Or are you just putting out posters on social media? And I say that with quotes because LinkedIn does not count. Young people, we are quite apathetic towards LinkedIn. So it's about effective communication. How are you reaching them? And how are you reaching them? And essentially that's ensuring community well-being. So I hope that something that I want the panel and everyone in the audience to think about today is how is your company, how is your workplace taking an active role into engaging young people for the future? Thank you.
Brilliant. Give them a clap. How terrifyingly articulate you are. So really important themes coming out already of the massively greater emergence of data, awareness and ability and cheapness of data, but also the need to co-design and to work with a range of groups. We're going to start unpicking some of the challenges later on. And now I'm going to follow the time-honoured programme, just going from right to left. Claire, you're up next.
Yes. My mic is working.
Hurrah!
That's a good start. That's a good start. So I'm representing the home team.
Buttons aren't, but
Yes.
sorry.
I don't even know how that happened.
Just lean back and you won't get too wet.
Okay.
It all happens. It all happens. On a Boy Smith chair panel.
In my nightmares, that's exactly how this afternoon started. As I was
It can't get worse.
So, it's okay. It's okay.
Let the audience know that her lines are now soaked and illegible.
Exactly. Completely illegible, yeah. So London has just thrown a bottle of water over me. But hey, we're used to it. We're used to it. So I work for Grapevine in Coventry, Rochfort. I'm not going to talk about data. I'm going to talk about our kind of bread and butter, which is building belonging. So our work, we do all sorts of things, but I guess there were three big buckets we could put that work into. We strengthen people, we spark community around them, and we also try to shift power in their lives and in relation to the services and systems that surround them. We don't just do that for individuals, we might do that in neighbourhoods, we might be doing that with communities of interest as well. And I thought I could sort of try and bring that to life for you by telling you a couple of stories of work that we've done. So, for example, Roots in Nature. We helped a woman who had lost a child develop her own kind of solution to the difficulty she was facing, which she called Roots in Nature. It's a project to buy a piece of woodland that is derelict in the city centre and open it up for community use. when she was still grieving from the loss of her child, she'd found solace in a community woodland that's in Leamington in Warwickshire, but that's a 40-minute drive away from Coventry. And Coventry actually has the least access to green spaces in the whole of the West Midlands. So she wanted to create something that was homegrown and nearer to hand. And she noticed that opposite her allotment in Coventry, there was a six-acre site. It's been gated and abandoned for as long as anyone can remember. It's full of old tents, marijuana plants, needles and potholes. There's a small river running through it, in fact, but it's a 15-minute walk from the city centre and it's on a bus route. We've supported her for the last year and she now has not only a core team advocating for this kind of, to bring this land into community use, she's got 200 local people supporting her. And our role really now has shifted towards helping her navigate difficult systems, because in spite of everything we've heard about how much we want this kind of thing to happen, it's still incredibly difficult for ordinary people to take power into their hands and make some change that they want to lead. So our role now is helping navigate systems, keep up motivation, keep up energy and focus. Resting spaces. We helped a young learning disabled and autistic man and his dad set up resting spaces, more places in the city for people to pause and relax and rest, whether that's for disabled people, anyone with a chronic health condition, families with young children, older people, or just people who are having a tough time and need a bit of a break. They've got 6 different resting spaces in the city. One of them, I can see Anna from Coventry Building Society in the audience. One of them is in a building society, they're in libraries, they're in office blocks. They want Coventry to become the first restful city in the UK. Need the Loo. I've had a lot of fun, I'm afraid, with Need the Loo and providing them with slogans, one of which they've adopted, and I'll tell you about that. Royal Flush is still a work in progress, but I think we're going to get there. So Need the Loo started...
You just had a Royal Flush.
I know. Need the Loo started when an arts worker called Anne, her friend's daughter, developed a bowel disease, and she was describing how really it was just a huge hurdle to try and leave the house with that difficulty. And it's a really important issue. If you can't afford to spend money on nice cups of coffee to get access to a suitable loo, again, people with small children, a disability, a health condition, they've done lots of research and shown that in Coventry, those people in those categories are limiting the time they will spend in the city centre, and they will spend less money there overall, or they just don't leave home. So Anne and her team of locals have been helped to they want to get this a bit of dignity and well-being to have more attention. And they've come up with Coventry's own bog standards. It's a set of guidelines that they want businesses and planners to adopt with the support of our public health department, including we're working on getting city centre businesses to join a scheme where they will allow people to use their nice toilets for free. Coventry's Urban Eden, if anyone was at I think it will have been mentioned at the community centres panel last night, but Coventry's Urban Eden began when a tree felled by Storm Eunice left an unsightly kind of patch of bare ground in the city centre, and Ade, a young Kenyan migrant, wanted to turn that piece of land into a garden. He's joined by a teaching assistant, a landscape architect, and lots of retired folk who want to they want to start greening up waste and derelict land in the city centre, and they are now working with the local authority to do exactly that. I can stop there if you want me to.
You can do a rousing peroration if you wish.
Okay.
Pull the threads
All right,
together
yes.
brilliantly,
All right,
and then you've got 25 seconds max.
So what this shows is people trying to not just experiencing belonging by taking action together on the things they care about. It shows people trying to shape the city in order to create belonging for more people. And I think that's what a prosperous city needs. It's not just about the development of the city centre and making it a nice place to look at and a place to shop. It's about it being a place that everyone who calls Coventry home can belong.
We can all say amen to that. Thank you very much, Clare. Well done for coping with the slings and arrows of outrageous mineral water bottles. Harry, you can top that by not having water fall on you, but off you go.
Yeah, unfortunately I've got no smart toilet branding for this intervention, so apologies to everyone. So I want to talk a bit about how we shift the way we make policy in this country to empower communities and to take into account the views of communities. I want to start by just recognising the scale of the challenge and the nature of the problem. So the evidence that there's something wrong with our politics is now kind of incontrovertible. So whether you look at decline in trust in politicians and in politics, in the number and the share of people in this country who feel that their children will be worse off than they are, turnout in elections, or support for kind of more populist parties and causes, there are lots of signals that something is not working and that communities and people in this country do not feel that politics is delivering what they want. And of course, the causes of all of those different challenges are many and complex. Each one needs individual interrogation. But broadly, I think we can split them into two. The first is that the outcomes of our politics are not delivering for people. So whether that's wages, whether it's health, whether it's access to public services, whether it's good, secure employment, those things are not being delivered in the way that we want our politics, the way we want liberal democracies to deliver them. The second is that the process by which politics delivers those outcomes is also not working. So we could solve some of those outcomes, but if communities and people still feel that they're not listened to, that they don't have a stake in society, that they don't have agency over their own lives, we will still see discontent in our politics. And that's why we need to change how we make policy. Firstly, because one of the reasons why our politics is not delivering the outcomes we want is because it's biased towards the interests of Westminster, towards the interests of global corporations, instead of local communities, and because the decision-making process that leads to those outcomes is excluding those communities as well. And I think, a lot of this conference today is talking about the high street, the communities in which we live, work, shop, and socialise. And I think the high street is a really powerful, visceral example of that failure. So if you look, too many of us have seen decisions taken that have led to industry moving away from our communities, that have seen our high street change from being places where there was thriving local businesses, pubs, communities, to where we now have kind of more chicken shops and betting shops and tragically empty shops than we want. And that shows both the problem with the outcomes of our policy making, but also the process, the fact that the decisions are so distant, whether it's a global boardroom or whether it's Westminster, that have led to that outcome. And the solution to this is both a new economic model, which provides growth for everyone, everywhere, but also a new politics that gives power to everyone, everywhere. And I want to end by just saying that I think there's a kind of totemic example that we could, or a policy that we could introduce in this country that wouldn't solve all those problems, but it would speak to that shift in terms of reimagining our high streets, the town centres that we live in. So I want to propose today that we introduce a digital sales tax, a tax on companies that are selling all of their products digitally. So I'm thinking here Amazon, those kind of organisations, who, by the way, pay vastly less tax than most of the businesses that operate in the town centre here in Coventry. And I think we should use the revenue raised from that to reinvent our high streets. But what I don't think we should do is what we've done previously, which is just hand that money either to a civil servant in Whitehall to decide how we do that, or maybe if we're a bit more adventurous, we might hand it down to a local council, and a local civil servant might deliver that. I think what we should do is create new organisations that are run by communities, where those budgets are spent through a participatory mechanism, so local communities can decide what it is that they want to do in their high streets. Is it new park space? Is it to support local businesses? Is it to introduce new facilities in that high street? And I think, although that won't solve everything, that would be a really totemic example of where we need to take power from and who we need to give it to. Thank you.
That's great.
Harry, that was fascinating, really thought-provoking. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to come back to you later in my chair's prerogative to give you a warning, just to ask you about the how we ensure the participatory mechanism doesn't get dominated by the loudest voices, because I think that's very, very important. That's a challenge in good spirit, I hope it feels like.
Yeah.
So last but certainly not least, on my far left, our gold medalist, Chris Boardman, who's done so many marvellous things.
Thank you very much. Just move that. Yeah, keep the water far away from me. Not that I don't trust you, Chair, but I'm a great lover of accuracy, so I will put that. I think
The Chair's clock is sovereign.
But touch on a lot of the things that we've already heard about. But we're in the business of culture change and getting people to do difficult. So the fascination is what gets them to do difficult. Understandably, I'm going to focus on transport, because transport is how we stitch all of these things together. Everybody in this room made a journey to get here. It has massive potential. Data isn't doing it for us. We've got decades of data, and it's clearly not driving a lot of the decision making. We aren't listening to logic. Those things are the foundation on which we build. We need them. Nobody buys a house because it's got great foundations. So let's stop prioritising looking at the foundations and talking about the foundations. So what I thought I'd do is I'd tell you a little bit about my daughter, data, and a willingness to lose. So my youngest daughter, Agatha, asked me a question she's the reason I'm sitting here, that's just, well over a decade ago now. She said, can we ride to the park? And the said park, and I know because I measured it, was 574 metres from our house. And my answer was no. Because I didn't feel, with the background that Nicola's described, that I could keep my daughter safe for just over 500 metres. That's not a place I wanted to live. It is not where she wanted to live, and so I decided to do something about it, and then it seems that I'm still here. So that journey took me via a phone call with Andy Burnham to Greater Manchester, where I became the Active Travel Commissioner for the region, and
I became the Active Travel Commissioner for the region and then Transport Commissioner, so stitching together trams, trains, bikes to give people a genuine choice. But that's where we piloted the whole concept of giving away the pen, properly giving away the pen and asking good questions. So the way you travel now is costing 3.75 billion a year. You're giving away 2.5 million a month just treating inactivity. Can you afford that? Do you want to do something about it? What would you need to change? Handed over the pen, and in the full knowledge that they may choose to do nothing. And that had to be a genuine choice, but we made sure that the consequences of nothing were visible. And it ended up with the region producing for themselves, they literally held the pen, a 1,800-mile network, active travel network that is now being produced. So that was the start for me. I then took up the job at Active Travel England, where my job is to get 50% of journeys cycled or walked by 2030. So I asked the team, because 50% were back to data and foundations, what does that mean? And they sort of went away, came back 2 days later and said it's 3.36 million more people active. And I went, okay, that's good. But what does that mean? And they went, walked away for another 3 days and came back and said it's 3.5 million fewer GP visits. It's 2 million fewer sick days. It is it's 18% reduction in street crime. All of the things that the people that need to make these decisions to do difficult valued and understood. And that was incredibly important. Incidentally, a good cycling network increases access, increases the catchment for public transport tenfold. So suddenly there's lots of compelling reasons the size of the prize is big enough. So I think it's really important that we bring that data together, we stitch it together. We aren't selling cycling, slightly reductive, but it's better alliteration. We aren't selling cycling, we are offering transport independence to kids. That's the reason for doing this. We're making our streets safer. We're creating freedom for families. We're making health easy for a nation that really needs it. I think framed correctly, those are choices that most of us would say, actually, those are the things I value. I would go with you on that. We don't have a product problem, we have a marketing problem, and that's what we need to address now. My daughter Agatha was 19 last year, and it's my intention that when she has kids, she can say, yes, we'll ride to the park.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you, and very, very moving, actually. I couldn't agree more. There's actually, I think, a very pleasing circularity in the conversation we're starting to have. We started with a much greater availability of data, its relative cheapness, its democracy. I'll come through various other points which we'll come back to in a moment, and actually ended with, actually, it's what you count, and it's then how you talk about it, and with what language, and that's something Create Streets is very focused on. We think language really, really matters in making the case for change. I gave Harry a heads up, and I said, don't give her any water. Bad manner. But put the water down and answer this question, Harry. So I just wanted to, how did you put it? On
Capture of...
That's it, participatory democracy, because you know, these types of discussions, no one says the things that developers say in private, so let me say it.
Yeah, sure.
They would say, if we're running an engagement session, I'm sure Grosvenor wouldn't say this, by the way, I'm not putting words in Nicola's mouth. No one turns up, and there are 4 or 5 usual suspects who always do turn up, and even if you run it in the high street, they'll turn up anywhere, and they'll dominate, and they will get their way. How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we should recognise there's always this argument, we shouldn't hand down power to from Whitehall, or we shouldn't hand power to citizens because, those decision-making processes are at risk of capture. Like, warning, our current system is already being captured, right? The voter turnout is vastly unequal. The representation gap in our country is huge. So although we're closing, for example, the gender gap in Parliament, not quite there yet, the class gap in Parliament, the gap between those going to higher education or not is huge. Companies spend billions of pounds on lobbying. So our system is already skewed. So I think let's not assume the status quo is fine and we shouldn't risk challenging it. But I think the second point is you can design these mechanisms with ways to kind of guard against some of those challenges. So for example, you could create a system where some of those decision-making processes in the policy I was talking about, the people that make them are decided by lot, right? We have jury service in this country. We could replicate a similar model to make sure that we have a representative sample of the community who help decide how we invest that money to engage and renew our high streets. Or where you can do it voluntarily, but what you have to do is make sure it's designed right. So for example, in Paris, they've done participatory budgeting. What have they done? They've advertised it really, really well. They've promoted it. They've made a thing of it. 2, they've given those people proper decision-making power. So when there's millions and millions of pounds at stake, people turn out and engage. And they've supported people, paid for people's time to do that. So I think you can design your way through these challenges. It just takes the will to do so.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Nida, can I just ask you to comment? I think you were sort of involved in a process a bit like that. Obviously, I'm sure it'd be very nice about Grosvenor, but just sort of any quick reflections on that just in a minute, then I'm going to turn it over to the audience.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to make sure that voices don't dominate, and the way you can do that is by making things more accessible. How do you incentivize the people that don't normally show up and give their 2 cents? And for example, for young people, For young people, it might be the opportunity to go on to further work experience or to gain some skills. For older people with kids, it might be just to take some time away from their home lives. But how are you going to engage them? It could be monetary methods, could just be social benefit. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm so sorry for not having given you the person. Do you want to come in? Is that what you're looking at me? So
I can add something. Yeah.
Just quickly, yes. Then I'm going to the audience.
Thanks, Nicholas. I think there's also a few things to say around making sure that you're giving sufficient space to engagement programmes. Often the fact that we get people coming along and the same voices and people really wanting to be heard is because there hasn't been space before that moment for them to get their views across. So they've got all this kind of pent-up energy and emotion that they really, really want you and other people to listen to. So when you want something out of them, you're then getting that kind of very reactive and very responsive engagement from them. So making sure that you're investing sufficient time in it and giving enough space to the conversation so that you can, first of all, listen to concerns before you can then get into the more constructive conversation, I think is important.
Brilliant. It's very empowering. Not having, so, if you think about it, what we're just discussing there is actually as ancient as the hills, because a jury service for participatory democracy, that's Anglo-Saxon. I mean, it's even older than the building we're in today. Right, I'm now coming to the audience. I'm going to take it in groups of 3. The gentleman in the blue jumper has gone up first, but I'm going to keep your questions short, please, because I will cut you off. So straight to the question, please. I know who you are, but go on. Names and where you're from first, please.
Ben Flatman from Building Design. It strikes me that most of the places that people want to live in the UK today were probably built at least 100 years ago, and almost certainly aren't the result of co-design or consultative approaches to creating places. So I'm just wondering whether there's any actual sort of evidence to suggest that this approach, I'm not sort of disparaging it, but what is the evidence that shows us that consultative approaches to placemaking lead to quality places?
Very, very pertinent question. The fact that Grosvenor Estate definitely has that. Just as we're in the corner, the lady there, and then the next round I'll come to the back right as opposed to the front left. Yes, and then there'll be the gentleman afterwards. Yes, quickly, please.
Hi, Nida. You posed a question. My name is Moni Nanda from Buckinghamshire.
Thank you.
You posed a question to the audience, and that was, how active are you engaging with the youth? You can't always pour from an empty cup. So my question in return would be, how active are the youth in also supporting the community? Because to really create true belonging, you have to work together.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And then I think there's a gentleman over there, and then I'll come back to the panel.
Good afternoon. My name's Dominic. I'm representing Clarion Housing. We are in the process of developing a cycling strategy. I also happen to live in Streatham, which today...
I grew up near Streatham. I'm not having a word said against it.
No, I love Streatham. I bought a house there. But of late, and Chris may know this, they have a low-traffic neighbourhood there, or at least they did until very recently. It was in the last week that LTN has been sidelined, been shut down again. I guess, so in the aspirations of the LTM were to increase the number of people who get onto bikes and
And
so
your
on.
question is, sir?
My question is, what do we do about that? Because local people have been up in arms as a consequence of that, and so we're opening it up, but we're closing it down all at the same time. How do we avoid that?
Brilliant, thank you. 3 really, really good questions. Thank you. You always get better questions from the panel than from the chair. I'm going to take those in reverse order, if I may. So, Chris, is it fair to turn to LTNs and you?
Oh, my favourite topic. We all love LTNs.
That's what he comes to Coventry for.
I mean, there was topically, there was a study out today that showed that their value has been vastly underestimated, and it averages out to about 100 to 1, which is incredible value. And I think it's also worth pointing out there's no such thing as a low-traffic neighbourhood. It's actually area-wide traffic management, which has been going on for tens of years. We stopped counting at 20,000. So it has been made controversial when actually it isn't. And the data around them is fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to the report that the PM commissioned, an urgent review into low traffic neighbourhoods, looking at the data from around the country. I have every confidence that they will be shown to be effective. Of course, traffic schemes sometimes aren't implemented well or could be done better, but that's not the problem here. That isn't the problem here. So if I might, just stitching together some of the things, I'm using that word a lot, I hope you appreciate that.
Everyone should use the metaphor.
Some of the things that have already been said, in terms of who do you want to get in a room for a consultation, well, I have 2 questions that have become my favourites this year. One is, and so what? What is the size of my prize? And I think we really have to address that in terms of what's the audience prize, not why you want people to come along, but what's in it for them. Because if you don't answer that, you don't get what you want. And the second one is, what must be true? So if you want the local people in a room for a consultation, and what must be true for that to happen? And keep following that question, and you'll get to the right action. What must be true? So very generic, but they've steered me well in the last year.
I think that's very to the point. Thank you. So, it's a question of how you get young people to. If I could just build on that for a second, again, in the deliberately being provocative, lots of developers, again, in private, they probably wouldn't say it where they're sitting here. Would say it's really hard to get young people to turn up. As even when you go to them, they don't want to engage. We desperately try to. We spend money. We pay people. They just won't do anything. And maybe one reason for that is lots of young people assume they're going to move away. Maybe there are good reasons, maybe there are bad reasons. Whereas if you've been living somewhere for 20 years, the evidence does genuinely suggest you are more emotionally committed to it than if you think you're going to move away in 6 months. So how about that for you?
I think it all has...
Sorry.
I think
I'm not trying to avoid the microphone. I just want you to give it to me. Sorry.
That's
Keep
okay.
the microphone.
That's okay. I think historically speaking, young people are quite apathetic towards democratic processes on a national level. We're underrepresented, whether that be in Parliament or other initiatives around the UK. So to get young people to engage, I appreciate is quite difficult. But when you look in places where young people are prevalent, such as social media, you see that young people are actually quite willing to engage, but they find it difficult to go to places where they think that their opinion is going to be wanted or appreciated. And I think that's where we need to fill the gap. And I completely appreciate that you can't pour from an empty cup, but maybe that's a national level problem that needs to be looked at much higher up in how we can support funding that allows for very intentional participation from young people.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I think that comes back to the points Harry was making about profound levels of trust. The Grosvenor estate, I think we can safely say, it was not built through a process of co-design. It was built by a hereditary landowner on bits of West London marsh. What's the evidence that co-design is better?
So I think we can point to the ingredients, drivers and characteristics of socially sustainable places being quite broad and capturing various ingredients of things around belonging, cohesion, ownership, civic pride. And in order to evidence those, people do need to feel like they've had a say in the process. Now, I think there's often a bit of an over-concentration on development in terms of engagement and consultation. Sure, it's really, really important to make sure that people have a say when change is proposed in their area, but that doesn't necessarily have to be about built structures. We often miss the point that you can get people to have a say around day-to-day place management. That might be around asset management, use class, events programs. You might want to involve people in the kind of governance and economic structures within their neighbourhoods. And I think that that's how you can build in co-design into long-term place management when you might have a really established place already, like Mayfair or Belgravia.
Brilliant. I don't think that was the killer answer in terms of the evidence. Claire, do you have the killer answer? No, you've got a pun. Thank you.
Oh, right. Oh, yes, of course. Well, there's a couple of things I would say very briefly. In general defence of co-design, if you don't do co-design, then you will design out some people, and the kinds of people who will get designed out are those who are already experiencing inequalities, the kinds of people I mentioned in my story. And if you do co-design, what you do is you untap a lot of unused resource, and we all need that.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I'm going to come back to the audience. I want to go to the right-hand side. Yes, gentleman there with the dark hair, and then the gentleman with the white hair. Let's do the white hair first, because he's closest to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Steve Kemp, here from Lincoln. For the past 10, 11, perhaps 12 years, we've had these things called neighbourhood plans. Mostly they've been done, this is a bit of a broad generalisation, mostly done by relatively affluent communities who are perhaps not dead keen on having too much new housing in their areas.
Yes, and your question is, sir?
Could they be better used, basically, and could they particularly be adapted to be better used by more needy communities?
Brilliant, thank you. Very, very good question. And then the gentleman in the dark hair, I think, just to the left, and then we're going to go back a couple of rows to a lady.
Hi, I'm Ben from Roost, a startup scaling housing cooperatives, and I'm a young person living in a major city. My revealed preference is to spend £1,200 per month for a room in Hackney, not £1,500 per room per month, and that's what's going to happen over the next few years if that doesn't happen. The Duke was very successful in simply optimising for land values.
So what was successful, sorry? The
Duke of Westminster was very successful optimising simply for land values. Why is participatory and co-design of the people who already live in a place better than simply optimising for land value?
Fine, okay, I think I got the question. It's very, very complex to explain. Another lady behind, yes.
Just Leanne Tritton from the London Society. Question on data. So you've talked about data being used with the Grosvenor estate. Is there any evidence or are there any examples of data being used by local authorities to map where the consultation is coming from? Because I think that is something that can be done quite effectively to weight or see where the weighting is from the responses.
Thank you very much. I think those are 3 quite hard questions, so thank you very much indeed. I hope my panel is shaking in their boots, because they're coming to them now. I'm going to turn, on the neighbourhood planning, interestingly, they have moved to less affluent areas over the last few years, so I'm going to turn to Harry on that.
So I think the one thing you can do to turn off communities is say, oh, we're going to do another load of planning. Like, consistently rehashing planning all the time is tiresome and not particularly effective. So I'm kind of skeptical from the off. But what I would say is, if what you do want to do is co-design plans for areas over a long period of time with the communities that are involved in them. And I think what would make a big difference here is if the people that you're planning with have the actual power to do something about the things that come up. So we did loads of citizens' assemblies across the country with communities. They talked about all the issues we might have talked about today. And then we were with the local government, and of course local government said, well, we've got no budget and we've got very limited powers. We can do these small things, but we can't address all these big seismic things that you're talking about. Until we devolve that power, until we give communities, local government, combined authorities those powers, and then create plans around them, we're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to take Chair's prerogative just out, because I've worked on quite a few neighbourhood plans. My God, they were set up to be complex, and they can be much easier. But it has got better, but there's a lot required. Now, I think there's a question on, why we don't just rely on as I understood it, on the market to show what people provide, and which councils are best using data. Who can answer either of those?
Thanks, Nicholas. I'm happy to take the data question first. You asked about examples of local authorities using data in a good way to evidence inclusive consultation. We work primarily in Westminster, and I think that's a really good example of a council that are using digital engagement tools to make sure that you can couple on facts about the makeup of a neighbourhood with ensuring that you're reaching a representative group. They use a digital platform called Commonplace, which Grosvenor has also got a partnership with. And what that allows you to do is look at where you're collecting data from, who's engaging with you, how old are they, what's their background, what's their religion, etc., etc. And then you can change your approach if you know that you're not quite reaching everybody that is representative of the local population. And that's an incredibly helpful way where data, insight and engagement all comes together to make sure that we can really engage in a meaningful way with a representative group.
Does anyone want to take the economics question? No, you haven't engaged the panel. I'll give it 10 seconds. The reason we can't right now is because we're 4 million homes short. So the power between those who wish homes and the power between those who have the land and supply them is so imbalanced in much of the country that it's hard, and I say this as someone who's instinctively a free marketeer, I think it's hard to make that work. I'm afraid that's the best you're going to get. We are, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, out of time. I'd love to say that I'm about to do a marvellously magisterial roundup of all the themes that emerged. I won't be able to do that, but there is a theme of data's availability, and far be it for me to say that Create Streets also has an online platform you can use, as well as the one mentioned. Oh God, I did, so sorry. Availability of data, but above all, what you count and how you talk about it. And then how you engage young people, given that they may be moving away. Clearly, it's about issues of participatory democracy. How do we get the power of away from the loudest voices dominating? It's a question of process, keeping it simple, giving real power and budget, participatory planning. Paris was mentioned. The last session of the day will be partly about Paris, so don't run off. Could I ask you please to give the panel, don't disappear after this because I'm going to tell you what to do next. Could I ask you please to give the panel a really fulsome round of applause?